This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze, You Are Special. Now, many of you know we have two different shows called Avoid the Maze, but this one is Avoid the Maze, You Are Special. And you're special because each one of us has something very positive going on inside of us. And it's up to us to express it, for us to accept it. And as I was just telling my guests before we came online, I wrote a blog this morning just about that because for about the first 55 years of my life, I was waiting for everybody else to tell me why I was special, what I did good. And if I didn't hear it, I automatically thought I wasn't special and I didn't do anything good. But it was my youngest son who made me realize, hey, mom, you are special. He said, but now I want you to go in the other room and think about why you are. And I looked at him like he was totally crazy. It's like, come on, I'm just me. I'm just mom. The more I thought about it, there are some things that are very special about me. My guest today is Lynette Weldon, and I found Lynette on podmatch.com, where I get to meet some very wonderful people. And Lynette, take us on a little journey because we don't necessarily end up where we are today because it's something that we thought about when we were a kid. In fact, if I think about where I wanted to be when I was 9 or 10 years old, it probably is not down this venue. So give us a little bit of background and the breakthrough things that you're doing in therapy.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me, Karen. My background, wow. I would say that I did everything the way it shouldn't be done. And I think I've come to a point in my life, or got to this point in my life, really by just kind of owning my mistakes, what I did wrong, and how could I be authentic and feel good about who I was, right? I think I struggled a lot throughout my lifetime with imposter syndrome. Do I really deserve this? And what if? And those kinds of things. And I spent a lot of time with my grandmother when I was growing up, and I think the biggest thing that I learned in my life is really being grateful for things. And when you have gratitude, you start to look at things different, I believe.
Right.
And, just learning, for me, it was a process of learning to be grateful for all the things that did happen to me, because they all happened for a reason. It's kind of like when we look back on our lifetime, it's like, wow, I went through that, which led me here. And from
Exactly.
there, I got there. And one of the things I started noticing throughout all the jobs and careers that I have, I've worked with a lot of younger women. And the one common thread seemed to be that they didn't see their value, and they never thought they were good enough, or whatever that belief inside of them was, that they weren't living up to others' expectations and
Exactly.
things like that. Yeah. So, it kind of, there's so many parts to this that, I'm the mother of a child with a disability. And, I saw all the parents, who didn't feel good about the situation or how they were handling things, or were they a good enough mother? And so I think, especially as women, we really have a hard time with our self-worth and in most things that we do. And I think more so because we are women, and there's this belief system behind being a woman that you have to do everything perfectly. You have to do everything. You have to take
Right.
care of everybody, and you always come last.
You
So,
know, and I think it's interesting because as women, when we choose to have a family,
mhm,
um, we have this picture in our brain. This is what this child is going to look like. This is what this child is going to be able to do in the future.
Mhm.
Um, and then when those expectations change, it's like, well, now we don't know what to do. And
Right.
I know for myself, when my son was diagnosed at the age of 6 on the autism spectrum, he was normal one day. He was neurotypical. And then the next day he had
Mhm.
this diagnosis. And it was like, oh my God, what did I do wrong for the last 6 years? And
Mhm.
what did I do wrong having him late in life? And just piled all that on. And I realized years later that was because I never had my own self-worth. So
Mhm.
when this all was diagnosed and I had to change my lifestyle to help him,
Mhm.
I, like you, felt like an imposter. But the funny part is that whatever we have as a disability, we have abilities and
Right.
we just don't recognize them.
Right. Right. Yes, absolutely. You know, one of the things that I do now, is I am a caregiver and I'm also a coach to caregivers. And I think that, when you are thrown into that situation, you really question yourself and you question yourself as a mother or a father or a caregiver. And, again, feeling like you're not doing enough comes into play. And a lot of it really is, you know, you feel like, I think caregivers feel like they're alone and nobody is going to understand how they feel. And it's not talked about, right?
Right.
Your life changes on a dime
Yes.
when you have a child with a disability. Your reality is now not the reality that you thought you were going to have, right?
Exactly.
Like when my daughter was born, um, I the first thing I thought is, I finally have a girl. I had two boys before her. And then she was born. And when I was told, it like my life just like stopped for a second. And I thought, she's never gonna go to prom. She's never gonna drive. She's never gonna get married. She's not gonna do this. She's not gonna, because you have this, reality in your
Right.
head that now is not the reality anymore, right? And so, there's so many things that go into that also, like there's the grieving process and the guilt, like, did I do something wrong and things like that. And it really attacks who you are inside and your self-worth and not feeling, good about yourself.
And besides just being her mother, you also
Mhm.
became more of a caregiver as well because you
Right.
had to learn that, okay, I'm not going to bring her up exactly like I brought up the boys. I'm going to try, but there are going to be certain things
Hmm.
that, hey, I just can't do. And I now have to be a little bit different even to my boys because I have a responsibility that is a little bit different. And the problem that I think most of us have is that we take it all on and we just think that everybody else around us is going to understand and conform to it.
Hmm.
But the problem
Hmm.
is they want to just go on with their lives and you can't blame
Right.
them. And so
Right.
as a caregiver, we start feeling like "Huh, nobody cares about us. We're doing all the
Right.
caring."
Exactly. Right. Yep. Yep. And you feel alone. And, there's things that you don't want to admit or talk about, you
Right.
know, um, and you're afraid to ask for help a lot of times because then you're afraid you're going to be judged. And, well, what kind of caregiver can you possibly be if you need help? And so there's a lot of isolation and not really talking about how you truly do feel and what you're truly going through. And so, I've just been kind of, on a mission to let everyone know that you're not alone and the feelings that you have are valid. And, the only way to move through them is to really acknowledge and start to talk about them and to be honest about it. And, with the people around you too, you know,
Exactly.
um, when I was at my worst in a burnout cycle, it wasn't my family who noticed. because they get so used to you doing everything, right?
Right.
And taking care of everything and not asking for help when you need it. And, so one of the things I really encourage people to do is just, be honest. And who cares if somebody else judges you? You have to live with you, and you have to be honest, and you have to be your authentic self, or nothing changes.
Exactly. And, you know, I found for myself that um, sadly my family was judgmental because they had always seen me as the person who jumped in and did things. Okay. And
Mhm.
when my son was about 11 years old, I was going through a real bad time. And my husband noticed it and he kept saying, "Tell me what you need." But I couldn't identify what I needed. Um, and my mother called me up one day and said, "You got to get your act together."
Yeah.
And I said, uh, "You're right, I do, but not in the same way that you think I do." Okay. And she goes,
Right.
"Well, what do
Hmm.
you mean?" And I said, I was hearing all the judgments and I was hearing her judgment. And I said, "You haven't stepped in my shoes. You don't know. You see your grandson, every 3 to 4 months for a day or two at a time because she lived a distance away." And she said to
Uh-huh.
me, and explain it to me. And as I tried explaining to her what our day to day life was like, she kept saying, "Oh, yeah, I went through things like that." And it was like, "Did you?" And maybe you did. I'm not going to judge you, but don't judge me. And it took her a long time for her to finally say, "Hey, I see what you're talking about. I'm sorry."
Hmm.
And it was like, and that was the day that I could pat myself on the back and say, "I'm doing the right thing." And it was hard telling her that I thought she was wrong. But if you're going to tell me I'm wrong, hey, I'm going to come right back at you. But as a caregiver coach, how do you help the person who is caregiving because they feel responsible, not so much because their heart is into it?
Um, I think, one of the very first things that we talk about is, first off, they have to recognize what's going on internally. What is the beliefs behind that? Um, you know, and is that belief really true? Do you really have to do this? There are a lot of caregivers out there that, they don't want to be in that situation, but they don't want to make the decision not to do it anymore. And, just recognizing, like, let's take a child, for instance, as a normal mother with a normal child, they move on, right? They graduate from high school, they go to college, they move out, they do, all of this. And, I've had a couple clients who still have, their adult children at home and they're miserable. And it's recognizing that, they did the best job that they could all of those years. And if this is no longer suiting you or the one you're caring for, it's okay to make that decision. It's okay to find them another placement or another situation that, this is not a life sentence for either one. And a lot of times, what happens is when they start to recognize that and accept it, the child or the adult child starts to blossom and they start to, now they are experiencing other things in their life. And the other thing too is that we're not always going to be here, and we need to prepare them for somebody else to come in and take care of them. And that's hard for women also who, I have a couple of clients right now that their spouse has had a stroke and they're no longer able to do things. And now, even to use the bathroom, right? But the spouse doesn't want anybody else to do it. and the wife feels like, okay, I got to be here 24/7 just in case. And it's just getting them to recognize the new reality of it.
Right.
You're not going to be able to be there 24/7, you know, 365 days a week. So it's just learning how to accept what you really truly feel and knowing that it's okay, it's not wrong. Your how you feel inside is it's not wrong. And just being honest about it is the first step, is just
Sure.
being honest and acknowledging it in yourself, for yourself, that maybe I just can't do this anymore.
And I think these are conversations that we should start having when we're healthy, so
Mm-hmm.
that we understand. I know my husband and I, we've had the conversation over and over again. Neither one of us ever would like to be in a nursing home, but
Mm-hmm.
we've also said that if there is no other option, um, you know, it's going to be what it is. And
Right.
yet at the same time, and this just happened this morning right before we went on, my husband's at work and he is terrible with dates, always has been. And he called me up and he said, and what are the days that I need off for the holidays and into December? And my first reaction was, why do I have to do all this for you? But I've done it our whole life. So it's like,
Oh.
do I expect him to change now? But as I was going over that with him, I said, I have to start letting go of some of this. You have to
Mm-hmm.
start writing it down. And he goes, yeah, I know. But if I don't count on you, then maybe you won't be here forever. And it's like, but I might not be here forever. And he goes, yeah, I
Yeah.
know. But if we had started this conversation years ago, it may have
Mm-hmm.
been better for the two of us that he isn't as dependent on me doing certain things that he's obviously very capable of because he knows his work schedule. He knows what he's got to do at work. There's never a question. And I think you were right about our children as they grow up. If we are constantly there for them, they don't always know how to take care of themselves
Right.
because we're doing it. And I
Mm-hmm.
noticed that when my youngest son um, moved 1,000 miles away for his career, he had lived with us as a young adult. And um, my biggest fear was, is he going to know that he's supposed to really run the dishwasher? Is he going to know that he's got to clean out his broilers? And I thought, I have to wait for him to ask me the questions. He should have seen it going on, but I didn't prepare him because I didn't know he really was going to get to this stage. And when he did,
Mm-hmm.
it was like overnight. So, yeah, our kids, need some of that independence no matter where they are on that disability issue.
Yeah.
So, tell me a little bit about the difference between caregiving for our children and then caregiving for our spouse or our parents, because a lot of us are sandwiched right in there that we're
Yeah.
taking care of a child. We maybe have a husband or spouse who needs help,
Mm-hmm.
and yet our parents are still living and they're struggling.
Yeah. I don't know that there is much of a difference. I think we feel the same about all of them, you know. Um, Maybe there's a little bit of a difference when it comes to our children because, it's our job to help them grow, right, as parents. But, emotionally, how we feel about it, I think it's pretty much the same. There's all the same, like within the course that I do, there's the common threads of, am I doing enough? There's the common thread of guilt of not doing enough or feeling like I don't want to do it anymore. A lot of times there's anger and resentment because now, you are the sole caregiver and all the responsibility falls on you. So I don't know that there really is much of a difference. The the situations might be a little bit different, but how we feel, I don't know that there is much of a difference. There's that feeling of, well, it's my mom. She took care of me my whole life. Now I need to take care of her. Or, you know what I mean? And so
Yes.
I'm not really sure that there is much of a difference there, at
And you
least in the
mentioned,
experience
yeah,
that I've had with others. Yeah.
and you mentioned something early on that we often feel grief. And many of us think that
Yes.
grief only comes with death, but
Right.
grief is about our expectations having to
Mm-hmm.
change.
Yep.
The fact that maybe we ourselves had all these wonderful plans that when our children hit a certain age, we were going to go out and travel and do whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know, again, when my son was first diagnosed, and of course, my husband and I looked at each other and said, this can't be, for 6 years,
Right.
he's been
Yep.
neurotypical. Um, our life went on hold for
Mm-hmm.
a good 18 years after that because the
Yeah.
rest of the world identified that he had these special needs and we had to care for him. And when we
Mm-hmm.
started to realize he was so capable that we didn't have to, we didn't know how to move forward. And
Yeah.
there was
Yeah.
grief there. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm giving this up and now trying to do something else. And so
Mm-hmm.
grief is real and we have to express it. We have to come to terms with it.
Yeah. We do. And I think a lot of times in the beginning, you go into survival mode and, you keep busy doing what you need to do to, adjust and make sure they have what they need. And you don't really acknowledge or recognize that there is a grieving process, maybe until years later. And it's normal in society to grieve somebody who passes away, but I don't think that people really recognize that, when you have a spouse that has had, a stroke or a diagnosis, or a child that's born, there's still a grieving process that has to happen.
Right.
Right. And we have to be able to move through that, um, in order to be emotionally okay. And when we don't acknowledge it or we try to hide it, I think a lot of us try to hide it because how dare we feel sorry for us when, you have somebody that, needs your help, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, but you're grieving, your life has just changed completely in a split second.
Well, I know I had joined a support group. I think my son was about 8 years old. And I thought I was becoming friends with one of the mothers in the support group. So I asked her to meet me for coffee one day. And she
Uh-huh.
hesitated. So she met me. And we're sitting in a coffee shop. And she goes, I just have to tell you, you're not somebody who I would have picked for a friend. And I looked at her like, oh my God, like we're both on this journey together. And she goes, our sons are nothing alike, and we won't have anything in common. And I just looked at her and I thought, wow, I'm here to help support you, whatever you're going through. You can
Yeah.
support me. And we're not putting it on a scale. And I hope people realize that, you know, when you're caring for somebody, you're not going to say, well, I'm doing more because this person has either this illness or that illness. If you're caring for
Right.
somebody, you're caring for them. It makes no
Right.
difference. And maybe they don't even have a disability of any kind. Maybe you're just, letting mom or dad move in with you just because you're being kind and it's a good
Right.
place for them to live.
Yeah.
So people have to get that out of their mode that, you know, we have to be the same, but we can still share at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how are your boys as older siblings, how are they with, mom's been spending her life, being a caregiver and she coaches on caregiving. Um, does it make them feel good? Is it giving them lessons to learn, or is it like, hey, we don't even want to hear about this anymore?
My boys, I have to say, are incredible. I think that my daughter has gifted the whole family with, so many gifts because I think we all have just learned so much from her. They're very kind and caring and have huge hearts. And I think it's because they've seen so much in their lifetime. They've seen the struggles, they've seen me be sad, they've been sad. So I think they're really proud of the fact that she is their sister. And that I want to help other people. I think it's been a family thing that, we've all grown together through it and learned so much, you know.
And when you make it inclusive, it
Hmm.
can work. It's when
Yeah.
you separate everyone out of it. I have a older son who wasn't living with us at the time when his younger sibling was born. They're 15 years apart, and they have different dads. And initially, my older son did not understand what we were going through. Now, he did live with us day to day, and I didn't burden him by, sending him emails telling him, hey, this happened or not. But
Uh-huh.
when he would get together, he would see that. Um, and he said to me one day, you just treat him differently than you ever treated me. And I
Yep,
explained,
I've heard that too.
right. And I had
Yeah,
to start to
yeah.
explain that to him. He now was becoming a young adult. And finally, I think he was in his 20s, and Alex was just maybe in junior high or something like that. And they had spent part of Christmas together. And my oldest son, as he was leaving, he said, I understand. He said, this has been tough on all of you, hasn't it? And I said, almost the same thing you did. It's been tough, but it's been rewarding. We've had to learn
Yeah.
a different way to communicate. And I won't say it was
Hmm.
easy because it was difficult for a long time. And now my two sons are, best friends, even though they live 1,000 miles apart from each other, but they're there for each other. So
Yeah,
kudos to
yeah,
you and your boys as well.
yeah. Thank you.
So if somebody wanted to, work with a coach who could really help them through their issues, how would they find you, and what are some of the things that you can offer to clients?
Sure. You can find me at livingtruecoaching.com. I'm also on Facebook under Coaching with Lynette. I offer an 8-week course that we touch on pretty much a lot of what we've talked about. First, just identifying the stress triggers that you have in the situation, learning new coping skills, incorporating some balance. What's really interesting is what comes up the most, Karen, is their belief system around it, and really, taking a really deep dive into, why do you believe the things that you believe? Um, Learning to find and ask different questions in your situation. What is going right? What is good in this situation? Instead of, looking at everything that's going wrong and things that you don't have control over. Learning how to let go of control over situations that you can't control, and expectations too. So we look at that. We look at, relationships and your expectations in those relationships, and learning how to ask for what you need and asking for help, and really just having a community of support so that they know that they're not alone and everything that they feel is valid,
You
whether
know,
they think it's good or bad.
and that feeling that you're not alone is really, really important. Um,
Very.
and, I can't stress it enough that when my son moved 1,000 miles away, um, I had to reach out to other parents that had gone through the emptiness syndrome when their
Yeah.
children were 18, 19 years old. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And uh, there were reactions at first. Oh, you're so lucky. He stayed with you an extra 10 years. And it was like, you're right, but I'm going through what you went through 10 years ago. And how do I deal with it? And I had to keep
Hmm.
his bedroom door closed for weeks because if I looked over and I saw his door open, I was expecting to see him, and not seeing him was
Yeah.
not easy. And
Uh-huh.
once I opened up and I shared my feelings, then I had people said, yeah, you know what? And I'm still going through it like 3, 4 years later. And it's like, oh, so that's not unusual. Okay. If you have that relationship, those are the feelings you might have. But find a
Yeah.
community. And if the first
Hmm.
community you find is not right, keep looking because there
Yeah,
are good
definitely.
groups out there. Well,
There are, and there's a lot of them that just, they're just stuck in complaining,
yeah,
and, I want people to know it doesn't have to be that way. It can be good, and you can, have your own identity outside of that role as a caregiver too, and really truly be happy. So if you are around a lot of people who are telling you things can't be different, run,
yes.
find people who support you.
Well, I'm so glad that you said that because those are things that we used to tell my son, and it took him a long time to figure it out. And he's now figured it out. And every once in a while, he'll say, I didn't really want to lose Bobby as my friend, but you know what? Bobby was taking all the energy out of me. It was like,
Yeah.
okay. And my husband and I have done the same thing. So kudos to you. We will put all your information in the show notes. So anybody who
Thank
is
you.
looking for support and understanding and, caregiving is something that most of us are going to be involved in at some point of our life. Uh, if our parents live long enough, if our spouses, need our help, even if our children, as they grow older, need our help, um, we need to be there. And so, you get to pick and choose, and there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer.
Great. Thank you for having me, Karen.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.